You get a symbiote. You get a symbiote. You get a symbiote. Everybody gets symbiotes. That's all we know how to do with Spider-Man is tell stories about symbiotes and Spider-Verse. Ah!
Now available on Lulu. John Haynes at Death's Door. The man who rules the world takes on the Greek god of death in this action-packed, all-new John Haynes comic book. Get your copy of the first John Haynes comic at lulu.com today. In a previous video, I talked about how Marvel Comics Spider-Man lost his way as a character, and many of the members of Spider-Man's Rogues Gallery, such as Venom, have also lost their way as well. Now, I was a kid back in the 1980s when the symbiote saga started in the Secret Wars after Spider-Man's costume got damaged on Battleworld. Now, as Spider-Man saw Thor get a new helmet and the Hulk, I believe, get some new purple pants, he went into a vending machine and he got a black goop that basically flowed all over his body and formed his black costume. And after the Secret Wars were over, Peter Parker came back to Earth with this new black costume, and this black costume was all the rage with comic fans because we had the ninja craze going on, and Spider-Man wearing this sleek black costume basically made him really cool because it made him appear to be stealthier and slinkier, and it was a really cool design that really made the character look a bit darker, and the tone of Spider-Man stories got a little bit darker under writers like Roger Stern and David Michelinie. And as Spider-Man went on, we got some really fantastic adventures in the black costume, such as Kraven's Last Hunt, which is considered to be an iconic story, and stories like Gang War. Again, these were stories that revolved around the black costume, and as things were going on, we got some great comics from Roger Stern and David Michelinie and Ron Frenz. Just really absolutely great storytelling. And as we got great organic storytelling with Spider-Man in his black costume, we started to see a bit of a mystery evolve as related to this costume and its powers, which again enhanced Spider-Man's spider sense, gave him an organic webbing which shot from the top of his hands instead of through web shooters, and the ability to morph and mimic into clothing. So it looked like an organic evolution of the character, but what was happening was Spider-Man didn't have a costume. He was actually having a symbiote that was bonding to his body, and as the symbiote was trying to bond to his body, what was happening was it was basically trying to take over his body, and Reed Richards drove the symbiote off his body, but the symbiote wanted to have a bonding relationship with him, and eventually broke out of the cage that Reed had put up as Spider-Man was wearing a facsimile of the black costume made out of cloth, and eventually of the red and blue costume. But what happened was the symbiote was trying to bond with him, and eventually Peter had to go into a church with a bunch of bells to break the bond with the symbiote, and that's where we find the story of Eddie Brock. Now, Eddie Brock at the time was a reporter who was trying to make shortcuts and make slick moves, and he eventually tried to do a story about the Sin Eater, which destroyed his career because they found out it was a bunch of lies, and he was going to this church to pray to commit suicide, and eventually, as Spider-Man was fighting the symbiote and managed to fight it off, the symbiote came dropping down out of the bell tower of the church onto Eddie Brock, and this created a new villain, Venom, who had a venomous hate for Peter Parker and Spider-Man, because both of them hated Spider-Man for two different reasons. You had the symbiote, which had hated Spider-Man for rejecting it, and you had Eddie Brock, who hated Spider-Man for ruining his career as related to the Sin Eater story. And the relationship between Eddie Brock and Venom and Spider-Man was very interesting and very compelling. And back in the 80s, it was just, again, these were must-read comics, but over time, the Venom character evolved in a way that really wasn't good for it, because as the Venom character was taken away from his villain status, because Venom was a very popular villain because of the alien ooze and just the way the character talked. You could just imagine his voice, and it just sounded very dark and gritty. It's just when you read the Venom character, it was just a cool character overall, and everything about Venom was just fun to read. But Marvel, because they were just caught up in the popularity of and the fame, the attention the character got, they wanted to transition the character from a villain to an anti-hero, and that's really where the character, I believe, started to jump the shark as related to the overall character, because aesthetically, Venom, when he first started out with David Michelini and Todd McFarlane, started out as a guy who just he was big and muscular, but he wasn't just super jacked. I mean, he was just a guy who was like big and in shape. Like in the 80s, you had a lot of guys, they had buff bodies like Arnold Schwarzenegger and many of the wrestlers like Hulk Hogan. And Venom, basically, Eddie Brock and Venom were just about that size. But as the 90s went on, the Venom character just started to become a caricature of itself, as they were looking to make him an anti-hero, the Lethal Protector. And that's again where the character started to get lost, because instead of the character just being this character who was just again a mocking caricature of Spider-Man with an evil grin on the symbiote's face, this is where we started to get into this Venom that was twice Spider-Man's size. He had a huge tongue coming out of his mouth, and he even got even bigger than that. And these days, the Venom character's evolution has just basically taken the character so far from itself that it's just the character isn't anything like anything it was before. Because when we went into the anti-hero Venom, we had the Venom and the Maximum Carnage, which they used the Carnage to be, oh, he's going to be evil, but Venom is going to be somewhat between good and bad. But that's where, again, I saw the evolution of the character getting worse. And the character has gotten even worse than that over time, to the point, again, where Eddie Brock was taken away from the character. At one point, they had Matt Gargan being Venom, and that's a period I really don't like, because, again, it just really was taking the character far away from its original mission, which was a guy who had Venom for Spider-Man and was going to be poison to him. And that was an era that I really didn't like as related to the character. Moreover, I didn't really like the franchising of the character as related to Carnage and the other symbiotes. I mean, everything was related to the Venom character has gotten so out of control that we really have lost the whole overall mission of the character. And these days, with the Venom character, things have gotten so crazy and out of control that we've basically made it where symbiotes no longer are something special or distinct. I mean, basically, we've had storylines like King in Black where everybody got a symbiote. So there's nothing unique or special about Venom anymore. I mean, there's nothing as related to Venom anymore, to the point where he no longer has any more Venom for Spider-Man, which was the original mission of the character. No, now he's in outer space, and he's basically a space god at this point, where he can control symbiotes all throughout the universe, and he and his son, he's even given his son a symbiote. So the character is, again, so far removed from what he originally was that, like Spider-Man, the character has basically lost his way. And that's the sad part about the Venom character, is that I remember as a kid, as a teenager, really getting excited for this character because he had a cool storyline. He had a feud with Spider-Man that was very interesting. But when you have bad writers and bad editorial, characters wind up losing their way, losing their direction, going off their mission, and that's sadly what has happened with Venom at this point. I mean, Venom they've built a world around Venom, but Venom is no longer distinct in his world. I mean, basically we have Marvel looking to milk the character for everything that it's worth commercially, and you can basically get every symbiote who ever came out as a Marvel legend, but what was lost is the legend as related to Venom, and that is the sad part about the Venom character. I mean, what's really sad is that, like that Oprah Winfrey bit where she talks about everybody getting a car, everybody has got a symbiote, And that's really taken away from what made a Venom a unique character. It's taken away from who he is. And again, with the whole thing that's related to the symbiotes and the way things went, I mean, you had the symbiote taken away from Eddie Brock. And again, the bond he had with him was different than the one he had with Peter Parker. And the whole Mac Gargan getting Venom, the symbiote, and Cletus Cassidy getting symbiotes, and everybody else getting symbiotes, took away from the character overall and made the Marvel Universe less of a rich picture, because when you have derivative characters, it really sucks the life out of the character. And with Venom, I really like the original Venom design. That's why that's the only Venom figure I have in my Marvel Legends collection, because this was the Venom that is the way David Michelini and Todd McFarlane originally created him, and even Eric Larson to a point. They created a Venom who basically, again, he was a big jack guy, but he wasn't overall like we have these days, where they have this super exaggerated character where he's just almost Hulk size. And I look at that whole anatomy, and it just doesn't make any logical sense to me, because the symbiote is supposed to be able to enhance a person to a point, but they're not gonna. Where do you get all this muscle mass to become that huge? Critical question I gotta ask many of the designers at Marvel, starting with Eric Larson, who started taking the character to an exaggerated level. I mean, yeah, you want to make the character look aesthetically cool, but you gotta start asking questions about anatomy, because if Spider-Man stayed slim when he wore a symbiote, and Venom, who was a little bit buff and Jack, got a little bit big, and was already big and just stood out in the suit, how does he become this super exaggerated size? That's a critical question I ask as related to the Venom character, who again has become a pale shadow of himself. I mean, when I look at Venom these days, he's almost the size of the Hulk, who's become exaggerated himself, because when I was a kid, the Hulk was only 7 feet tall, and he was a bit wide, but now he's almost 20 feet tall, and that makes no sense to me. The same way Venom is almost 20 feet tall. You got a 6-foot guy who has a symbiote, and he's turning into a 20-foot guy. Yeah, aesthetically this looks good on a comic page, but that's where the editor pulls you aside and says, hey, these proportions are a bit ridiculous, and it's a major problem as related to the character. Again, many of these characters at Marvel Comics, they're just, again, pale caricatures of themselves, and that's what happens when characters over time don't have good editorial to rein them in. But it's just, again, it's sad to see what has happened to Venom, because what has happened with the Venom character is he's become far removed from who he is. I mean, now he's a space god who controls symbiotes all across the universe, when in actuality he originally was just a reporter who lost his job, had Venom for Spider-Man, and wanted to go out here and make him pay for costing him his career. And we're so far away from that story that the character no longer even acts like anything at all. I mean, he's got a son now, and his son has a symbiote. Again, these characters are growing and evolving in really bad ways, and Venom, what happened to him was just sad, because we see a character who was one of the great villains of the Marvel Universe turned into a sympathetic villain, and I'm going to go in depth on that in another video about sympathetic villains. And I really don't want to sympathize for the villains. I want to have actual bad guys and actual stuff where the bad guys are shown as a threat. I mean, when you have bad guys, sometimes, yeah, you want to turn them face here and there, but there has to be an organic progression, and the way Venom was made into a hero, just really, it doesn't really flow for me organically. And again, this character is one of those that just shows me how lost many creators are as related to telling stories about great Marvel characters. Now, this was a video requested by one of my viewers, and if you want to request a video, you can send a donation to the Cash App by clicking the links in the description box. And if you want to pick up my comic, John Haynes at Death's Door, you can find a copy of it on Lulu.com. And if you want to pick up my first comic I did with Bill Walko, We Steam No Good Deed, you can find that comic on Kindle for 99 cents. And you can also pick up some of my action-packed fantasy fiction on the SJS Direct imprint, like the ISIS series, the Steam series, the John Haynes series, and the books of the Spinsterella trilogy, and my vampire novel, Eternal Night. That's all I have to say for this video. You can comment, rate, and subscribe. Now available in paperback and e-readers, John Haynes, 1987. Learn lessons about life and teenage love in the 1980s in this coming-of-age John Haynes story. Get your copy of John Haynes 1987 in paperback and e-readers at Amazon.com and online booksellers everywhere. Support Black-owned and Black-operated digital broadcast media. www.niceradionetwork.com. Nice Radio Network broadcasting 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.